This is a FDA podcast recording of the June 4th, 2012 University of Calgary Consortium for Peace Studies speaker series on the Iran-Israeli nuclear problem. What follows are excerpts from the event. The four speakers are Dr. Arthur Clarke, University of Calgary Professor of Medicine and founding member of the University of Calgary Consortium for Peace Studies, Dr. James Keeley, University of Calgary Associate Professor of Political Science and Research Fellow at the Center for Military Strategic Studies, Jorg Ostrowski, MIT graduate in Architecture, Environmental Design, and 36-year professional experience in sustainable architecture, Shahid Mohouni, Iranian citizen and educated in strategic analysis and natural resource engineering. Dr. Clarke?
The Israeli writer Uri Avnery and others have argued that the threats against Iran are very unlikely to lead to an attack on Iran because Iran would immediately close the Strait of Hormuz, through which passes about 40% of the world's seaborne oil, and that would have devastating effects on the U.S. economy and the world economy. These writers sometimes add that the threats are not so much about nuclear weapons at all, as they are a means of promoting regime change or distracting attention from the Palestinian problem. These are important considerations. The case of Iraq and many other examples have shown how an issue like weapons of mass destruction can be fabricated to obscure other intentions, such as regime change. We need to understand such things and be able to see through a lot of rhetorical fog to be effective as global citizens. The pathology that I speak of is rooted in human behavior. That means that all of us are part of the problem. We cannot become part of the solution until we understand that, and then begin to work steadily and effectively to bring our own part of the pathology under control. As in medicine, practice must be goal-directed and evidence-based. It must have human well-being and not state power as the priority. To find the cure or prevention of a disease such as cancer, it is important to look at the cellular and molecular basis of the disease. In somewhat the same way, to find a cure or prevention for the cancer that we are inflicting on ourselves, we have to look at the molecular level, namely our cells and our ways of thinking, which lead to our action or our inaction that contribute to the pathology.
Jorg Ostrowski.
Now, if we go to 1801 to 1814, Iran signs treaties with both France and Britain. 1856 to 57, there was a battle between Iran and Afghanistan and Britain for the control of Afghanistan. Number 5, 1872, the British wanted concession in Persia, so they paid the Shah to come to Europe, and that way they were able to get some of their concessions. And then number 6, the Dutch industrialist and venture capitalist set up a trading company in Persia. In the early 1890s, there was the first oil derrick set up in southwest Iran. 1901, the Shah granted the British government or British citizen some prospecting rights for oil. 1908, almost when they had depleted their money and not finding very much, at the last minute they did find oil, and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was set up, which eventually led to British Petroleum. The British government also took significant stakes, monetary stakes, in this company. 1921, the British had a small coup d'etat. They installed a Shah, who then later tried to renegotiate more equitable terms for Iran for the contracts. In the 1930s, the British were wanting to bring in more troops, and they then implemented world sanctions to get their contracts. Now, so was the British and the U.S. imperialism responsible for the current nuclear brink? So that's my question. if we carry on with the timeline a little bit, we see that in 1935, Britain dictated the new terms for this agreement that they had, and Persia was then renamed Iran. 1953, as some of you remember, the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh was overthrown by the CIA and M16 out of Britain because they needed to have, or they wanted to have, the control of the oil. So they installed the Shah of Iran. 1954, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was renamed BP, and the US, Britain, France, and Germany began 27 years of work with Iran on nuclear work. 1957, Eisenhower announced the US Atoms for Peace program, and in the following decade they got the Tehran Nuclear Research Center established with the first US nuclear reactor. 1968, Iran signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which they ratified in 1970. 1974, this is really quite interesting. The Shah had plans for 23 nuclear power stations. And so by the year 2000, which is pretty ambitious, with US help, of course. Now, the CIA in 74 acknowledged that Iran may sometime want to have nuclear weapons. 1975, the Germans and the French got into the act, and Siemens was instrumental in the contracts for nuclear power stations. The 1976, the U.S. president offered Iran a U.S. reprocessing facility. In 1978, we saw demonstrations, and SAVAK was getting quite hard on some of the demonstrators, and quite a number of people got killed, and the revolution exploded at that point. Even in 1984, the International Atomic Energy Association was keen to assist Iran on reactor fuel fabrication. Is the nuclear issue, like Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, really about circumventing the U.S. pegging of international trade, specifically oil? There is an alternative to that, which a number of countries have proposed, which is called the alternative oil trading paradigm. It has three features: the alternative stock market for oil, not based on US dollar. Number two, trading oil in either dinars or gold, euros, yuan, which is Chinese currency. And the countries that were promoting it were Iraq, Iran, Libya, and Venezuela. So, the problem: number one, Neolithic imperialism; number two, undemocratic governments; number three, governments run by corporations, not the voters; number four, men who are arrogant and ignorant; number five, a lack of vision and compassion, intelligence and sensitivity; war for profit. Several books have been written about Halliburton's profit from war. Crimes against humanity, such as Canadian role in Afghanistan, war and Holocaust that have been promoted. You look at North Korea in the 1950s, Vietnam in 1963, Iraq, Palestine. And if you look at the number of dead, injured, poisoned, maimed, displaced, orphaned, widowed, and refugees, talk about tens of millions of people. Yet, even with this invasion of other countries, Iran has not invaded any country for 270 years. There's also been interference in the affairs of sovereign nations. There's hypocrisy from our government. For instance, why do we expect Iran versus Israel, Pakistan, India to comply to things that they, Israel, Pakistan, India, do not have to comply to? So a lot of it is a waste of taxpayers' money by deception, lies, and crimes. So there are solutions: political. There's legal, there's study groups, and there's a number of other possibilities. First of all, political, to help educate and enlighten Prime Minister and members of Parliament. Number two, you can sign a petition for peace and against sanctions and war that will come out later from the consortium, I think. We can remind government that it is our government, that it does not represent the majority of the voters. We can vote no confidence in our own way. We can support the Occupy movement. There are legal things as well. We can set up a study group to challenge and repeal the Special Emergency Measures Act that implemented the sanctions against Iran. We can also set up a study group on restitution and reparations to the people of Iran by the corporate profiteers who ultimately should be paying for the decommissioning and the replacement of nuclear with renewable energy. We can oppose the omnibus bill, which is before Parliament, and also the oil sands. And oil sands, I think, is connected with the sanctions in Iran. We can also study group to petition the International Criminal Court to carry on with its investigation and prosecution of any MPs for the crimes against humanity in Afghanistan. You can look at the work of Professor Kiefer. And number 5, you can support Middle East nuclear-free zone, which is not a new idea, to help move the Canadian Spring and regime change in Canada as well. So if we look at other solutions through partnerships, number 1, we could develop a green plan for Iran. 2009, they had quite a very interesting public demonstration, the Green Movement in Iran, and unfortunately it was not allowed to prosper. So a green plan for Iran would be based on sustainable development, appropriate technology, preservation, conservation, regeneration, revitalization, renewable energy, international cooperation and partnerships, respect for and integration of local culture and wisdom. There's an Adopt a Family program. We have set up an Eco Village of Hope project where on the ground you can actually assist.
Dr. Keeley.
And the place to start with is the nuclear fuel cycle. The stages you have to move through in order to generate fuel for your reactor, and then whatever you do with it after that fuel is used, the spent fuel. The key steps here, the ones that are the problematic ones in particular, are enrichment and reprocessing, because that's where you can acquire not just fuel suitable for a reactor, but also highly enriched uranium suitable for weapons use. Or you can extract plutonium from your spent fuel, and you can potentially use that as well for a nuclear weapon. Now, these are particularly sensitive portions of the fuel cycle then. Efforts have been made since the 1970s to control access to particularly those two technologies. The Nuclear Suppliers Group was focused very strongly on trying to constrain access to enrichment and reprocessing technology. The problem is that all of these technologies are fairly well established and are in many ways mature technologies. Reprocessing technology was declassified in the 1950s. If you want a plutonium production reactor, you can do that from declassified plans of 1948 style natural uranium graphite moderated air-cooled reactors. And the problem is in part that these technologies are more and more available simply because more and more countries are technologically capable. There's a great little quote, comes from a, I think, 1993 hearing in the US. A fellow told the assembled congressman that, you must recognize that the first country to develop and use a nuclear weapon was, by 1993 standards, a third world country. Piston-driven aircraft, lathes that were not computer operated, very, very primitive computing apparatus, and they still did it. And the part of the problem is simply that these capabilities are spreading, whether used for peaceful or for military purposes. That overlap is the problem. This gets us then to the latent proliferation problem. Now, in 1976, Thomas Schelling noted that the proliferation problem is not, do you have a bomb, do you not have a bomb? It's proliferation in a time schedule sense. That is, given your current capabilities, given your technological abilities, how long would it take you from a standing start to acquire a nuclear weapon? There are three basic things involved in this. You need the nuclear material. You need to design and produce your warhead components, and some of the processes there will not involve the use of nuclear material. And you need a delivery system. Aircraft, cruise missile, ballistic missiles, planes, trains, automobiles. One fellow suggested once, I ran across this in some other work I was doing, if you want to smuggle a nuclear weapon into the United States, find yourself a bale of marijuana. He wasn't necessarily kidding. But you need those three sets of things. You need to bring them together. And again, the problem is that the technologies for these, not just producing nuclear material, but also things that can be adapted to warhead use, things that can be used for delivery system, those are diffusing as well. So a basic problem you have simply is the capabilities are still significantly difficult, but much more widely accessible. And that is why people refer to a latent proliferation problem. The mere act of acquiring some components of that nuclear fuel cycle may put you in a position where people can say, oh, you've got a nuclear option. You may or may not exercise it. That's a different question. But the problem then becomes, given where you are, if you decide, how fast can you move from there through breakout to there? Can you move faster than other people can mobilize to put pressure on you to stop you before you get this thing? That's the latent proliferation problem. This, as I say, is not unique to this specific instance. It is a generalized problem. It's one that's been recognized for, 30-odd, 40-odd years. You can try to block access to some of those technological capabilities, but we've seen that's becoming less and less feasible. You can try to safeguard those facilities, and you do. This is what the IAEA safeguard system is about. But you can always tell the inspectors to leave. Now that, of course, gives the game away, and that, again, raises the question. How fast can you move if you decide to move? That's why people get worried about some of this stuff. Particular focus you will have seen in the news is on enrichment. There are a couple of facilities in Iran, Natanz, which I think was revealed, disclosed to the world in about 2003, and then Fordo much more recently. There have been indications that Iran had been looking at laser enrichment as well, but those plans may have been shut down. The crucial things here, facilities are under safeguard. We can get into some of the issues about how you safeguard an enrichment plant, a centrifuge plant, because that can be a challenging thing itself. But the crucial things really are down here. Holdings of enriched uranium at 3.5% and at 20%. This figure I've taken from the May 2012 IAEA inspection report. Similarly, this one here. I've modified these somewhat because there may have been some reductions. ISIS is the Institute for Science and International Security. It keeps a close watch on these kinds of things. It has some interesting information. And I've noted here some of the 6,200 basically kilograms may now have been consumed, shunted to the Fordo plant for further enrichment, and some of that 145 kilograms at the Fordo plant may have been withdrawn for fuel fabrication and for downblending, actually reducing the level of enrichment. Now, the 20% fuel is now the point of particular international focus. The Tehran research reactor uses, I think it's 19.75, I've rounded it up to 20. It has a fuel load apparently of 116 kilograms. It received its last load of fuel from Argentina in 1993. That fuel, as of about 2009, is pretty much finished. Now, so Iran now apparently would have enough on hand, or close to enough on hand, to fuel that reactor, and it could last from 10 to 20 years, that one fuel load, depending on how you operate the reactor. Iran apparently has other research reactors it plans on building as well. Part of the problem here, however, is this. Natural uranium is 0.7% U-235, which is the isotope that you use for nuclear weapons. Moving from 0.7% to 3.5% is a big, 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 big jump. It's a lot of work to do that. Moving from 3.5% to 20% is a big jump too. But once you get to 20%, some of the figures I've seen suggest that you are somewhere between 80 and 90% of the way to getting to weapons-grade uranium, which is about 90 to 93% uranium-235. And that's one reason, again, why people look at things like production rates and stockpiles, and they start asking what's happening. Okay, now we know that the Security Council and various other bodies and states have demanded that Iran suspend its enrichment activities. We also know that for the past several years there have been swap proposals put forward, effectively, initially with the 3.5%, and now more recently they're focusing on the 20%. The idea is to buy time by reducing the stockpiles and therefore extending the breakout time if there was such a thing being contemplated. The problem here, we're talking not so much about intentions, although we're talking deep, deep, deep distrust. We're talking capabilities. Distrust is a whole ball of wax by itself. But that's, from a technical point of view, the nature of the difficulty. Where do we stand at the moment with the International Atomic Energy Agency? Based on Iran's disclosures in 2003, the agency has concluded that there was a structured program with some military dimensions to it. Now, what the agency does, this is similar to what it did with South Africa, similar to what it did with Iraq. It goes in and it asks, what were the organizations? What were the nature of the activities going on? Who were the individuals involved? What was the equipment, the material, the information? What did you do with this? What happened to it? Where is it now? And what it's been able to do is clear up a number of issues, but there are others that are still left unclear. And that's where things stand now between the agency and Iran. Cooperation between the two has been affected by the broader issue, in that Iran may slow down cooperation sometimes, may speed it up at other times, or it may say, look, the allegations you're investigating are simply false. Why should we deal with you on this sort of problem? Where we are now is that in May 2012, Iran and the agency reached a preliminary agreement to create a structured approach to try to resolve the remaining issues. They're still working on the detail of that structured approach. In the meantime, one specific issue that has arisen and that a lot of people are flagging are with a particular site, Parchin. I think it may be at a military base, and there's a question about a particular facility on that base, what it might have been used for. They're still negotiating over access to that site. So that's an ongoing issue between the agency and the IAEA. The agency and Iran. The IAEA position is that there was a structured program with military dimensions before 2003. They're not clear on what has happened with that since. They don't think it's a structured program. They think, have there been bits and pieces that have survived and that are continuing? And that's the issue between the two of those. Now, in terms of Iran and various individual states and groups, the P5+1 are the Security Council veto powers plus Germany. Other groups that have been involved, of course, the EU3, basically France, Britain, and Germany. And at various times since 2003, these groups have been negotiating with Iran. If you want one account of that from a non-American perspective, very interesting account, look at Mohammed al-Baradei's memoir, The Age of Deception. You may know that he was the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Negotiating efforts have been long, difficult, mainly fruitless, and throughout the process of these, the Iranian government has basically increased its enrichment capacity, both in terms of the size of those facilities and the level of enrichment going on. And in the meantime, of course, the U.S. and the Security Council have been imposing stiffer and stiffer and stiffer sanctions on Iran. And we know there have been attempts to sabotage one way or another the Iranian nuclear program. There was a meeting in Istanbul in April which led to an agreement to try to get an incremental and reciprocated approach to working out these things. That's what's led to the Baghdad meeting in late May. Baghdad simply produced trades of information. Here's my initial ask, here's my initial offer. Oh God, are you serious? Basically on both sides. They did agree to meet in Moscow in June, and that's where we stand at the moment. Some of the issues that arise, some very specific, some more general. We're going to see a lot of interest in the enriched fuel, the 20% fuel. We may find some willingness to play on the question of the lower level fuel enrichment. There may be a possible acceptance, who knows, of Iran's lower level enrichment activities. There's questions of sanctions, new sanctions, existing sanctions. How do you time an easing of these sanctions? Who goes first? If I go first, will you actually reciprocate? The Iranians have complained for some time that they keep making decent offers and all they get for their trouble are sanctions. If you listen to the West, they keep saying all you guys do is play for time and then in the meantime build up your capacity. You've got a real problem there in how people interpret the timing and what the other fellow is doing. Verification and safeguarding issues arise. Currently, 16 Iranian nuclear facilities, and I think about 9 others, with declared nuclear material are subject to IAEA safeguards. The IAEA has said that it has detected no diversion at those facilities. It also says, however, that it cannot assure itself that there are no undeclared nuclear materials or activities. And that's where something like the additional protocol comes into play as well. The additional protocol strengthens the IAEA safeguarding and inspection rights. Iran signed this in 2003, did not ratify but provisionally implemented it, and then in the course of the breakdown of negotiations over 2005-2006, it simply stopped implementing the protocol. So one issue here is to get that protocol back into operation. The final thing I've got down here at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it because it's kind of low, is the problem with two-level games. This is a sort of technical term, but basically one of the things you see going on is that each side has a domestic party it's got to deal with. And the problem is, how do you reach a deal on the international level which will also fly at home? That's a very difficult problem. Again, this is not unique to this particular issue. It goes on in all sorts of issues. You can trace this back in some analyses to pre-World War I negotiations between the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. So this is a general problem, not simply for here. Now, finally, this is something I worked up looking at some of the commentary in the arms control and the nuclear non-proliferation community. What do people hope for? What do these people hope for? What do they expect? A real question here, of course, is acceptable to whom? Now, as I've indicated here, if this is a solution, it may not be the best one. It may not even be the most likely or feasible one. And something to bear in mind is this would be a temporary solution. They're buying time. They're trying to buy time. The feeling is that Moscow will really focus on things like the 20% enrichment program. They'll focus on other things like sanctions and the general level of enrichment. They're trying to work out a deal that can particularly handle outsider concerns about that 20% enriched uranium. This will then, if it works, presumably generate incremental progress on other fronts and keep the ball rolling. Now, what you're looking for, whether on the 20% front or on the more general, is you're looking for some sort of point of convergence amongst all these parties. This point of convergence is going to be within that nuclear options section of the latent proliferation problem. It's going to be, unless something very odd starts happening. They're going to try to surround that point with verification and safeguard measures to give timely warning of a possible breakout. That's what safeguards are supposed to do. Anybody's safeguards. Safeguards on anybody. Safeguards on the Canadian nuclear program. That's the whole point of safeguards. This sort of settlement on the nuclear side, whether it's simply part of an incremental process like at Moscow or not, will not solve everything, and it won't do it all at once. What it will do, if it comes about, is simply help to manage things. And management, I give a very specific meaning to. That you're trying to shape the content and the trend in the motives, the interests, and the calculations of the parties over the longer term. That's what you're looking at. You're not looking at a grand settlement here. You're looking at an attempt to keep the thing going, try to ratchet down the tensions, with any luck, get some progressive resolution of some of these problems. And so I looked at what happened at the Baghdad meeting. I looked at whatever accounts I could find there, and everybody went home sort of unhappy. But what they were really doing was saying, as I say, this is my initial ask, this is my initial offer. When they go to Moscow, they have a better sense of what people are willing to put on the table, where they think they've got some overlap, and they've got to start working towards those positions of overlap. Will they find an adequate degree of convergence? Will they find a way of handling the timing problems? Those are the sorts of things I'd be looking for in this. But as I say, this is not going to be a complete solution that comes out of Moscow, if you get a solution at all coming out of Moscow.
Shahid Moini.
And operation of civilian to civilian diplomacy. None of them like it. In the Iranian passport is written officially, I promise not to travel to Israel when you receive your passport. And if you cross Iran and you land in Israel, they will question you, why did you fly atop of Iran? And reluctant diplomatic and peace negotiation approach. That is the common sense and common points between the government of Iran and Israel and many other governments in that region. The result is a shadow of the war and nuclear contamination all over that region. That is not only about Iran and Israel. There are many other countries in that region. When you go and talk with civilians, when you talk with the normal, ordinary people out of the political system, everybody is really confused. What's going on there? Who wants nuclear weapon? Who wants to keep? Does it help me to earn more money or feed my children or send my child to the school? It's the same question in Israel. It's the same question all over this region, but nobody really has a clear answer to it. And nobody wants to talk with their own people, with their own nation about it. And outside that region as well, many people are confused. What's going on there? If you look at that region already, all these countries involved in the serious conflict issue. Now, discussion between Iran and Israel, unfortunately, is very small. We cannot point it out very much. These countries are in conflict now. Crisis is going on daily basis. Then we look at Pakistan. It's not stable at all. It just needs a trigger. It can be more dangerous than Iran and Israel issue. Turkey, they could have still solved the problem with the Kurds, with the Turks, and with the Iraqis neighbor. Nobody talk about Turkey. All the violation of the human rights in Turkey. And pure silence. Saudi, I think it's maybe a promoter of the human right in Middle East. Nobody talk about it. They are good friend of George Bush and his alliance. And on the other hand, that's a major shipping route for oil. Any problem, any disturbance in this shipping oil system will affect all over the will have effect all over the world. Economy of many countries will collapse. Right now, Iran is in sanction. Because of the sanction on oil in Iran, Philippines, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, they face serious problem. Because Iran has one of the best quality oil in the world, and they have the refineries which was established based on the oil in Iran, not any other heavy or crude or oil from oil sand operation. So that's the main problem. And even the politician like General Eisenhower, even he was a general, he noticed that time it is the politician who make the problem. And don't let the people get to the peace. If you leave the people alone, for sure they want to have peaceful life. What do people think about Middle East? We think Middle East, the Middle East people. Nobody wants a nuclear weapon on that region. Nobody out of this political system are interested to have access to such a destructive weapon and even destructive technology. Even there is no safe nuclear technology. It has been proven that even a reactor for producing electricity cannot be used. And we have seen in Japan last year. Citizen to citizen diplomacy. The politicians are not able to provide peaceful negotiation. So it's the time that citizens talk together. Very simple. And Israeli artists start this campaign. And immediately it went through all the media. And this one was sent from Hamadan. The person cannot put his picture because immediately he will be arrested. He or she will be arrested by the government. And this is the grave of Esther, one of the holy prophet of the Jew, which is the holy shrine for the Muslim as well. Many Muslims go and pray there. And dialogue and peace initiative through civil societies. That's something that we need to work on. We need to have some centers like Calvary Global Center. People come and talk about the solutions. And have main focus here. Up there, unfortunately, is like an epidemic all over the world among the politicians. They thought that's the solution. And promotion of the interchange and cultural understanding. There are many common cultural art and historical points between Iranian and Israelis. between Iranian and Arabs, between Iranian and Turks, that we can work on that. Middle East can turn to a serious, active, cultural participant in that region. And hopefully it brings the peace to that region. It's a very rare item on that region. For the last 100 years, there is no peace on that region. And maybe we use the old wisdom of that region. Maulana Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, known as Rumi to many of you, was sitting with his student in this academy or his place, and one of the students ran to him and said that, Rumi, two wise men are fighting. Come and do something. Rumi didn't react. He just kept talking. The second student came and said, Rumi, two wise men are fighting. They are beating each other. Come and do something. He didn't react. The first student asked, you don't care? And Rumi answered that if they were wise, they wouldn't fight.
Thank you very much for listening in to this episode of the Foundation for Democratic Advancements podcast. For the FDA to continue to improve democratic processes worldwide, we rely upon your generous donations. Donate to the FDA, please visit our website at www.democracychange.org. To learn more about our mission, vision, and work, you can also visit us on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.